I finally told the truth about what happened to me as a child, and my sister told every single person in our family that I was making it up for attention. This is what happened to the girl who spoke first. There is a specific kind of quiet that is not peaceful. It is the quiet of a child who has learned that certain sounds bring consequences. Not the sound of crying, necessarily, though that too, but the sound of telling. The sound of saying out loud what is true. That specific sound in my family was the dangerous one. I learned this early. I was 9 the first time I told my mother something true that she did not want to hear. Something small compared to what came later, just a thing that had happened, a thing involving my father's brother who came to stay with us that summer. I told her with the full trust of a 9-year-old who still believed that mothers were the place where true things went and were held safely. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said I must have misunderstood. Then she said I should not repeat it. Then she said, and this is the sentence I have turned over in my hands for nearly 30 years, she said, "You will upset everyone if you say things like that." Not, that should not have happened. Not, I will take care of it. You will upset everyone. I understood. I was 9, but I understood. The calculus of that house was not about what was true. It was about what could be held without disturbing the surface. And my job, the job assigned to me without ceremony and without my consent, was to not disturb the surface. So I learned to be quiet. I was good at it. I got better at it every year. I learned to organize my face so it did not show things. I learned to answer questions in the specific way that answered them without actually answering them. I learned the art of being present in a family without being visible, of taking up exactly as much space as was allotted and not 1 inch more. Renee was different. Renee was the youngest daughter, and she was bright and pretty, and she had a way of moving through that family that I watched with something I could not name as a child, and understand now as longing. She was allowed to be loud. She was allowed to be demanding. She was allowed to have needs that the family rearranged itself to meet. She was the kind of child who cried and was comforted, who complained and was heard, who asked and received. I do not blame her for being that child. She did not design the system. She just benefited from it. Curtis, our oldest brother, had his own position in the architecture of the family. He was the son, the firstborn, and he occupied that space with the particular ease of someone who has never had to justify their place in a room. He was not unkind to me. He was simply largely elsewhere, absorbed in the concerns of boys and then men, present at the table and absent from the underneath of things. I navigated that house for 13 years with the specific skill set of a child who has understood that her safety depends on her invisibility. I was quiet and capable and unremarkable in the way that children who are managing something internal become unremarkable, because all the energy that might have been loud or expressive or demanding was being used for the management. Teachers said I was mature for my age. My parents' friends said I was so well behaved. My mother said I was her easy one. Easy. I had made myself easy. I had worked very hard at it. I left for college at 18 with the feeling of a person who has been holding their breath for a long time and is finally, allowed to exhale. I went to a school 4 states away because 4 states felt like the minimum viable distance. I did not go home for the first Thanksgiving. I said I had to work. I stayed in my dormitory room and I ordered food and I watched television and I felt, for the first time in memory, like the air around me was breathable. I called home dutifully. I visited at Christmas because Christmas felt non-negotiable. I kept the surface smooth from a distance, which was easier than keeping it smooth from inside the house. I did not think about what had happened during those years in any organized way for a long time. Not because I had forgotten. You do not forget. But because I had put it in a room in myself and closed the door, and the closed door was the condition of my functioning. I was 34 when I opened the door. I had been in therapy for 2 years by then, with a woman named Dr. Simone who was patient and careful and did not push doors open, but sat with me while I found my own way to them. She did not suggest what was behind the door. She just helped me understand that the door was there and that I was the one who had the right to open it. I opened it slowly over the course of a year. What was behind it was not a surprise. Some part of me had always known exactly what was in that room. What surprised me was the size of it. How much space it took up. How much of my life had been organized around keeping that door closed without fully understanding that was what I was doing. Dr. Simone said when I had finally said the whole thing out loud, she said, "You have been carrying this for 25 years. I said, I did not know what else to do with it. She said, "You know now." What I knew now was that I needed to tell my mother. Not for justice, not to burn anything down, but because the secret had been a kind of weight that I had been carrying for both of us, and I needed to put half of it down. I chose a Sunday in October. I had practiced the words. I drove to her house with my heart in my throat, and I sat at her kitchen table where I had sat 10,000 times before, and I told her the truth. What happened in that kitchen changed everything that came after, and not in the way I had spent a year hoping it might. My mother was making tea when I arrived. She always made tea when I came on Sundays, the same brand she had bought for 30 years. The ritual of it unchanged, the kettle and the cups and the specific sound of it all reassuringly the same. I sat at the table and watched her move around the kitchen, and I thought, this is the last moment before. Whatever comes after what I am about to say will be different from everything before it. I sat inside that last moment for a few seconds longer than I needed to. Then I said, "Mama, I need to tell you something. Something about when I was a child." She brought the tea to the table. She sat down. Her face arranged itself into the particular expression she had for serious conversations, attentive and composed, the face of a woman who had learned as well as I had to manage her surface. I told her, not everything at once. I told her carefully, in the order that made sense, starting with the summer I was 9 and the uncle who stayed with us and what had happened, and then the years that followed and what those years had contained. I had practiced the words, but they came out differently than I had practiced them, more fragmented, more halting. Because saying a true thing to your mother's face is different from saying it in a therapist's office or in the mirror of your own bathroom. She listened. She did not interrupt. She held her teacup and she listened, and her face did not change in the way I had hoped it might change, did not open or soften or move toward me. It stayed composed. It stayed managed. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that I counted the seconds without meaning to. Then she said, "Diane, that was a long time ago." I looked at her. She said, "Why are you bringing this up now?" I said, "Because it happened. Because I have been carrying it for 25 years and I needed you to know." She said, "I do not know what you want me to do with this." I said, "I do not want you to do anything. I just needed to tell you." She said, "Your father's brother passed 3 years ago." As if that were relevant. As if the death of the person who had done it was a kind of administrative closure. I said, "I know." She said, "This will devastate your father." Not, "I am sorry this happened to you." Not, "I believe you." Not, "I wish I had known. This will devastate your father." I sat at my mother's kitchen table and I understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that I had handed her something she was not going to hold. That the thing I had carried for 25 years was not going to find a resting place in that kitchen. That she was already, even as we sat there, figuring out where to put it so it would not disturb the surface. I drove home. I called Dr. Simone the next morning and told her what had happened. She said she was sorry. She asked how I was. I said I did not know yet. She said that was an honest answer. 3 days later, Renee called me. I knew before I picked up, not the specifics, but the shape of it. I knew that my mother had called her, that the thing I had told in a kitchen had already traveled, that the decision about what to do with it had been made without me. Renee's voice was careful in a way it was never careful. She was usually easy with me, casual, the younger sister warmth that had always been genuine even when the family dynamics underneath it were not. This voice was not casual. She said, "But Mama told me what you said." I said, "I see." She said, "Diane, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." I said, "Okay." She said, "Is this real? Or is this something you have convinced yourself of?" I sat with that for a moment. Something convinced yourself of. As if a thing that had happened to me in my own body across 4 years of childhood was a narrative I had constructed in a therapy office. I said, "It is real, Renee." She said, "Therapy can sometimes." I said, "Renee, it is real." There was a silence. Then she said, "I just think the timing is strange. Uncle Raymond has been gone 3 years. Why now?" I said, "Because I spent 30 years not talking about it and now I am talking about it." She said, "I hear you. I do not know, Diane." That was Thursday. By the following Sunday, she had told Curtis. By the Sunday after that, she had told our aunts. By the end of the month, the word she was using was not confused or misremembering. The word she was using was lying. And then came the call I had not expected. Not from family. From someone I had believed was safely outside all of it. And that call made clear to me that what Renee had set in motion was wider and faster than I had understood. The call came on a Tuesday evening in November from a woman named Gloria, who had been my mother's closest friend for 20 years and who I had known since childhood, who had been at our holiday table and at my graduation, and who I had always thought of with simple warmth as an extension of family. She called my cell phone. I had not given her my cell phone number in years. She had gotten it from someone, my mother or Renee, which told me something about the nature of the call before she said anything. She said she was calling because she cared about me. She said she was calling because she was concerned. She said she had heard some things and she wanted to give me the chance to explain myself before people drew conclusions. Explain myself, as if I were the one who required explanation. I asked her what she had heard. She said she had heard I was making accusations about a family member who was no longer alive to defend himself. She said she understood that therapy could sometimes bring up complicated feelings, and that those feelings could get confused with memories. She said she had known my family for 20 years, and she could not reconcile what she was hearing with the family she knew. I listened to all of it. I did not raise my voice. I had learned a long time ago how to be still inside a situation that wanted to destabilize me. I said, "Gloria, I appreciate that you called. I am not going to discuss this with you." She said she hoped I would think carefully about the impact on my parents. I said goodbye and I hung up. I sat in my apartment and I thought about the word traveled. What I had said to my mother in a kitchen had traveled. It had gone from her to Renee and from Renee outward in every direction available to it, and in the traveling it had been transformed. It had left my kitchen as a truth and arrived in Gloria's mouth as an accusation. It had left me as a daughter telling her mother something real, and arrived everywhere else as a woman making things up for attention. Attention. I had spent 30 years being invisible in my own family, and now the story was that I had invented a trauma to be seen. I called Dr. Simone the next morning. I told her about Gloria's call. I told her what Renee was saying. I told her the word she was using. Dr. Simone said, "How are you holding up?" I said, "I feel like I am watching something happen to me from a distance. Like it is happening to a version of me and I am standing slightly outside it." She said, "That is a protective response. Your system is managing the impact." I said, "How long does the managing last before it stops working?" She said, "It varies. But what I want you to hear is that the reaction you are describing from your family is a known pattern. When someone in a closed system introduces a truth that the system has organized itself around suppressing, the system does not open to receive it. It closes harder. It identifies the truth teller as the threat." I said, "So I am the threat." She said, "To the story they have been telling themselves for 30 years, yes." I thought about that. 30 years of a story. 30 years of a family that was fine from the outside, that sat in the same pew and had loud holiday tables and stayed married and graduated and kept the surface smooth. 30 years of that story, and now one woman at a kitchen table saying something true, and the entire architecture moving to protect itself. I was not crazy. I was not lying. I was not doing it for attention. I was a woman who had told a true thing and discovered that the true thing was less dangerous to everyone around me than the telling of it. Curtis called me 2 weeks after Gloria. His call was shorter than I expected. He said he did not know what to believe. He said this was a lot to process. He said he needed time. I said I understood. He said, "I am not saying I do not believe you, Diane." I said, "What are you saying?" He said, "I am saying I do not know what to do with this." I said, "You do not have to do anything with it. It is not yours to do something with. It happened to me." He said, "Everything affects all of us in this family." I thought about that sentence. Everything affects all of us. As if my abuse were a weather event that had happened to the whole family equally. As if the impact on their comfort were equivalent to the impact on my body and my childhood and my 30 years of silence. I said, "I know." I did not say what I knew. The month that followed was the loneliest of my life, and I have had some lonely months. Not because I was alone. I had Dr. Simone and I had 2 friends who knew the full story and held it carefully. But because the loneliness of being disbelieved by your own blood is a specific kind that does not have adequate company in ordinary human connection. It sits in a part of you that only family can reach, and it sits there cold. Renee sent me a text in December. It was 3 sentences. It said she loved me, but she could not support what I was doing to the family. It said she hoped I would get the help I needed. It said she would be there when I was ready to come back to reality. Come back to reality. I read that text standing in a parking lot outside a grocery store in the cold, and I thought about a 9-year-old girl at a kitchen table being told she would upset everyone. Some things travel in families across generations, not just the harm, the mechanism for containing it. What I did not know was that Renee had also been talking to someone outside the family, someone I had told about my own experience 2 years prior, in confidence before I had told my mother. Someone I had trusted with the early fragile version of the truth before I had found the words to say it cleanly. When I found out who she had called, it rearranged everything I thought I understood about where the betrayal had actually started. Her name was Priya. We had been friends for 6 years, the kind of close that develops between women in their 30s who find each other at the right moment, who recognize something in each other across a dinner table at a mutual friends gathering and decide to keep showing up for each other. I had told Priya about my childhood in pieces over the course of our friendship, the way you tell someone things when you are learning to trust them. By the time I told her the fuller version 2 years ago, before I told my mother, she had enough context to understand what she was hearing. She had held it carefully. She had said the right things. She had not pressed me or pushed me or made it about her in any way. I had trusted her with it. What I found out in January, 4 months after the kitchen table conversation, was that Renee had called Priya. I do not know how Renee had her number. I do not know what was said in that call. What I know is what Priya told me when I called her. Because Priya, to her credit, called me herself the day after Renee contacted her, before I had any idea it had happened. Priya said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I am telling you because you deserve to know." I said, "Okay." She said, "Your sister called me yesterday." The floor of my apartment tilted slightly. She said, "She wanted to know what you had told me. She said she was trying to understand the timeline. She said she was worried about you." I said, "What did you tell her?" Priya said, "I told her I could not discuss anything you had shared with me in confidence. I told her she needed to talk to you directly. She pushed back. I ended the call." I said, "Thank you." Priya said, "Diane, she was trying to build something. She was looking for inconsistencies. She was asking me about specific details, whether your account had changed, whether you had seemed unstable. She was not worried about you. She was collecting information." I sat down on my couch. Renee had gone to my friend. My sister had gone outside the family to someone I had trusted with the private early version of my truth, trying to find ammunition. Trying to find the thing that would let her say, "See, even her own friend had doubts. See, the story changed. See, there were inconsistencies." She had not found what she was looking for because Priya had shut it down. But the attempt was its own information. This was not a sister who had heard something upsetting and did not know how to process it. This was a sister who had made a decision and was working to support it. This was active. This was a project. I called Dr. Simone. I told her about Priya's call, about what Renee had tried to do. Dr. Simone said, "I want you to notice something. Your sister going to your friend is not the behavior of someone who is confused. It is the behavior of someone who is managing a threat." I said, "I am the threat." She said, "Your truth is the threat, and she is trying to contain it." I said, "Why? Why does it matter this much to her? The man is dead. My parents are not being asked to do anything. I am not taking anyone to court. I am just asking to be believed." Dr. Simone was quiet for a moment. She said, "What do you think she is protecting?" I thought about it for a long time. I said, "The family she believes she has." She said, "Yes, and possibly something else. When a sibling in a family discloses abuse and another sibling works this hard to discredit them, there are sometimes additional reasons. Not always, but sometimes." I sat with that. I did not go there fully in my mind, not then. It was too large and I was not ready. But the question she had planted stayed with me, growing quietly in the weeks that followed, while I was managing everything else. February came and Renee sent a message to a group chat that included most of our extended family. I was still in the chat. I do not think she remembered I was in the chat or she had not thought through that I would see it. The message said she wanted everyone to know that she loved her family and that she was sorry for any confusion recent events had caused and that she hoped the family could come together and move past it. She did not mention me by name. She did not need to. 23 people saw that message. Several responded with heart emojis and agreement, and we love this family and variations on the theme of moving past it. Moving past it. Past what? Past the fact that something had happened, past the fact that I had spoken, past the inconvenience of the truth existing. I left the group chat that afternoon. Not dramatically. Just left. And then I did something I had not planned to do. Something I had resisted doing because it felt like a line I was not sure I wanted to cross. I wrote things down. All of it. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Everything I remembered. Everything I had told Dr. Simone. Everything in order. Everything with as much specificity as I had. I did not know yet what I was going to do with what I had written. But having it outside my body, on paper, in my own handwriting, made it feel more real in a way that I needed it to feel. What happened the following month was not something I had expected. It came from the direction I had least anticipated, and it changed the shape of everything. My brother Curtis called me on a Saturday morning in March. Not a text. A call, which from Curtis meant something different from his usual pattern of low-engagement check-ins. I answered with the particular wariness I had developed for family contact over the past 5 months. He said, "I want to come see you, if that is okay." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I have been thinking for 5 months, and I think I owe you a conversation." I said, "Okay." He drove to my city the following weekend. We met at a coffee shop because I did not want him in my apartment. Not yet. Not until I knew what kind of conversation this was going to be. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. Not dramatically, just the way people look when they have been carrying something heavy without showing it. He ordered coffee and he wrapped his hands around the cup and he looked at me for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "I believe you." I had not known how much I needed to hear that from someone in my family until he said it, and something in my chest responded that I had not known was still waiting. He said, "I believed you when you first told me." I did not handle it right. I said I needed time, and then I let Renee's version fill the time, and I did not push back, and I should have. I said, "Why did you not push back?" He said, "Because it was easier not to. Because Renee was loud and certain, and you were quiet, and I told myself quiet meant unsure." He looked at the table. "That was not fair to you?" I said, "No." He said, "I also." He stopped. He started again. "I also did not want it to be true. It is easier to believe someone is lying than to believe that happened in our house and nobody stopped it." I said, "It was easier for everyone." He said, "I know. That is not an excuse." We sat there for a moment with that. I asked him what had changed his mind. Not that I needed a reason to feel he was credible, but I wanted to understand. He said he had talked to his wife. His wife, whose name was Simone, different Simone, who had known me for the 12 years she and Curtis had been together, who had always been quietly warm with me in a way that I had appreciated without fully understanding. He said he had told her the whole situation, and she had asked him one question. He said she asked him, "Has Diane ever lied to you before? About anything? In all the years you have known her?" He said he could not think of a single time. He said his wife had said, "Then why are you letting Renee's certainty outweigh your sister's truth?" I thought about his wife. About a woman who had asked the right question at the right moment. About how sometimes the people who are not inside a family system can see it more clearly than those who are. I said, "Tell Simone I said thank you." He said he would. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the abuse specifically. I had said everything I needed to say about the specific facts, and I did not need to say them again to be believed. We talked about the family, about the pattern of things, about the way our house had worked when we were children, and what we had each understood about it and what we had not understood until later. Curtis said something toward the end that I have thought about many times since. He said, "I think Renee is scared." I said, "Of what?" He said, "Of what it means if you are telling the truth. About what the family is. About what she did not protect you from. About." He stopped again. "About whether there are things she did not let herself know." I looked at him. He did not finish the sentence. But the sentence did not need finishing. I drove home from that coffee shop and I sat in my car in my parking lot for a long time before I went inside. I thought about Renee as a child. I thought about what she had and had not had access to in that house. I thought about the ferocity of her defense, the energy of it, the lengths she had gone to, the call to Priya, the group chat message, the specific word she had chosen. Lying, not confused, lying. The ferocity of a person protecting something can tell you what they are protecting. I had learned that from Dr. Simone. I turned it over in my mind in my car in my parking lot. I was not ready to have that conversation with Renee. I did not know if I would ever be ready. But I was beginning to understand that her behavior was not simply cruelty. Not simply a sister who had chosen the family story over me. It was also possibly the behavior of a person who had her own closed door in herself and who was not yet able to let anyone near it. That did not make what she had done acceptable, but it made it slightly more legible. The following week, I got a call from my mother. The first direct call from her since October. Her voice was different from the kitchen table voice, less composed, something underneath it that I had not heard in a long time. She said, "I need to see you." I said, "Why?" She said, Because I have something to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago. I held the phone and I thought about a woman making tea in a kitchen 6 months ago, and a face that stayed composed and a sentence about devastating my father. I said, okay. What she told me when I came was not what I had expected. And it was not something I had been prepared for. But it was the thing that finally, after 38 years, made the shape of everything make sense. She opened the door when I knocked and she looked smaller than I remembered her. Not physically smaller. She was the same woman in the same house, but smaller in the way that people look when they have been carrying something heavy and are about to put it down, and the putting down has already started in their body before they have said a word. She made tea again. Same kettle, same cups, same ritual. I sat at the kitchen table and I watched her and I thought about how many important conversations of my life had happened at this table and how none of them had gone the way I needed them to go. She sat down. She did not touch her tea. She said, I knew. I looked at her. She said, not everything, not the full extent, but I knew something was wrong that summer. I saw something. I told myself I had misread it. I chose to believe I had misread it. The kitchen was very quiet. She said, I have told myself for 30 years that I did not know. That is not true. I knew something and I looked away from it, and I have been looking away from it ever since. I sat across from my mother and I heard her say out loud the thing that some part of me had always known and had never allowed myself to fully name because naming it would have required a grief I did not know how to survive. She had known. Not everything, but something. And she had chosen the surface over me. I did not cry. I had cried more than I had expected over the past 8 months, and I was in a different place now, past the part where the tears came easily, in the harder, drier country of reckoning. I said, why are you telling me now? She said, because Curtis came to see me last week. He told me he had been to see you. He told me what he had said to you and what you had talked about. She looked at her hands. He told me it was not too late to tell you the truth. Curtis, my brother who had taken 5 months to get there and had gotten there, who had driven to my city and sat across from me and said, I believe you, and then gone to our mother and said, it is not too late. I thought about his wife asking him, has Diane ever lied to you before? I said, what about Renee? My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Renee has her own things to work through. Things I am not able to explain to you right now. Things she may need to come to herself. I did not press. I understood what she was not saying, and I was not ready to say it out loud in that kitchen either. It was too much for one afternoon. I said, Mama, I need you to understand something. You telling me this now is important. It matters to me, and it does not fix what happened. It does not give me back the 30 years I spent carrying this. She said, I know. I said, I do not know what our relationship looks like from here. I need time to figure that out. She said, I know that too. She reached across the table and she put her hand over mine. The same gesture she had made when I was small, the specific weight of her hand on mine that I had known my whole life. I did not pull away. I also did not turn my hand over to hold hers. I just let her hand rest on mine and I looked at the kitchen table and I breathed. I drove home. I called Dr. Simone from the car. I told her what my mother had said. There was a silence on Dr. Simone's end that had a particular quality, not emptiness, but fullness, the silence of someone receiving something significant. She said, how do you feel? I said, I feel like something I have been holding for 30 years just shifted. Not resolved, but shifted. She said, that is significant. I said, I also feel angry. I feel angry that it took Curtis believing me for my mother to tell me the truth. I feel angry that it took 8 months of my life and my sister telling everyone I was lying, and a call to my friend and a group chat message and all of that. I feel angry that all of that had to happen before someone in my family was willing to be honest. She said, that anger is accurate. I said, I know. Renee and I have not spoken. I do not know when or if we will. I do not have a clean resolution to offer you on that front because there is not one, not yet. And I am done pretending things are resolved before they are. I have done enough of that. What I have is this. I have Dr. Simone, and I have Curtis and his wife who asked the right question, and I have Priya who shut down a phone call and called me the next day. I have the document I wrote in February, everything in order, in my own handwriting, existing outside my body. I have my mother's hand on mine at a kitchen table and the complicated grief of a truth that came 30 years late. I have myself, the version of me that is not organized around the quiet that protected everyone else. The version that is still learning to take up space, still learning what it feels like to say a true thing and not immediately brace for the consequence of it. I am 38 years old. I spoke first. It cost me more than I had budgeted for and gave me back something I had not known I was missing, which is the knowledge that the truth of what happened to me is real and is mine and does not require anyone else's acknowledgement to be true. It is true whether they say so or not. It always was.
Hope you guys enjoy the story. Tell in comments your opinion.